it's important to recognize Deuteronomy's own genre and style of speaking. Right. So Deuteronomy is kind of taking the law from Exodus and parts of Numbers and preaching it almost from a fiery, it's sort of fiery sermon at points. And so the rhetoric is heightened. So that command there, Deuteronomy 7, is a kind of heightening of earlier commands rhetorically to make a point. And I think that's important to keep in mind. It's kind of like, when Jesus says, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. If your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut them off.
Yeah. Oh, that's really helpful. That's a helpful comparison.
And so you hear it and you're meant to feel the force of it. You're not meant to just say immediately, oh, you don't mean that literally. Okay, fine. Right? Like you're to take it seriously and let it sink in. And so when Moses in Deuteronomy is saying that to the people, they're to take it seriously, but I don't think it's meant to be taken strictly literally. And the story itself seems to suggest this, especially how later interpreters of that command at the end of Joshua and throughout the book of Kings and Chronicles and Ezra, Nehemiah interpret that verse. So the earlier command in Exodus said that they're to displace the peoples, and specifically that God was going to displace the Canaanites little by little, it says. And lest the wild animals should increase in the land. So that the original command was to tear down their altars and avoid their idols and not intermarry with them. And that seems to be the enduring sense in which Israel interpreted that law. Now, there are some references in Joshua to the people leaving alive nothing that breathes. So we do have to deal with those seemingly literal applications. But there, again, I think we have to think about the genre in which it's written, where that kind of heightened rhetoric was part of the sort of Deuteronomic tradition of saying that they wanted decisive victory. And of course, we, even in some of the passages where it says they left nothing alive that breathes, there are plenty of Canaanites left in those areas that breathe.
Right.
So
it'd be like saying, like when you say we left nothing alive, it'd be almost like saying today in a sports analogy, like we really whooped their butt or something like that. It's that kind of a trope, right?
Yeah, it is. And so, there are some complexities there that need to be dealt with. So like, I don't want to just say, oh, it's just trash talking, but there's definitely a component of that. So I think those are just a couple of things, and I talk about more in the book about how to wrestle with the harem laws. They're challenging, but I do think that Joshua is not trying to have us come away from those stories thinking that that a literal application of harem is the main or only thing that's required of Israel. And it's also important to remember that the book was written for, or to, in its final form, a people who are probably living during the exile or even later. And that's not really a contentious view. I mean, there are some people that would balk at that, so it's important to bear in mind. But Joshua is part of this whole story that runs from Joshua through the end of Kings. And if it is like written with that end in mind, which it seems to be, then the earliest date for its final form is the exile. And that's a time when the possibility of ousting Canaanites is no longer possible. Or when they come back into the land, it's no longer possible.
Well, if you ask Matthew, the evangelist, he thinks there's still Canaanites. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But that's a good example.
Phoenician woman.
Right. She's a Canaanite because he's trying to amp up that same thing.
Exactly. So, but it doesn't mean that those laws are irrelevant. So the question is, how do we abide by the harem laws when there are no Canaanites around? And I think the answer is to root out any hint of idolatry among the people.
Yeah.
And to avoid the kind of intermarriage that would lead to idolatry.
Yeah.
So that's how it's meant to be lived out.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that's really helpful. I mean, we might still struggle with, probably should still struggle with, is preserving stories about wanting to wipe people out a good spiritual practice, or like wrestling with that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But we do want to recognize, right, the very likely rhetorical function of these stories isn't to actually lead people to go out and take up arms, but to make them, ultra committed to Yahweh and no other God. So the destruction piece really gets applied to idolatry. That's what is being called to be destroyed.
Yeah, and Jesus commands his disciples, if you want to be my disciple, you have to hate your father, mother, brother, sister,
right?
And which you could render as forsake. And there are plenty of people that follow Jesus as disciples loyally and are on good terms with their parents or siblings, right? But the point of that is to consider the cost of discipleship and consider the total loyalty that discipleship requires. It's not a sort of split loyalties endeavor. Mm-hmm. And some people literally do leave their families to follow Jesus. There's that like literal costliness, hopefully not combined with actual hate, right?
Right.
But the rhetoric is important, right? And I think in the same way, I don't want to soften the blow of the harem text that we don't feel their force as well. And I think that's key.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you even talk about in the book, the first thing they do when they cross, right, is they take out the knife, not to do battle against the enemy of flesh and blood, but to circumcise themselves, right? Which already kind of tells us, like, what the heck were their parents doing in the wilderness? Like, did they not, they didn't get the memo? And, but it's like, this is the first thing we need to do, because actually the battle really, to use a Pauline term, what I hear you saying in the book clearly is the battle actually isn't against flesh and blood. Yeah. And that's not a spiritualizing interpretation of the text. Mm-hmm. That is actually the rhetorical aim of the text.
Yeah, very well put. Yeah, exactly. Because the strategies they employ in the first 6 chapters, like the whole book is setting you up one thing after another of like what it is that's going to lead the people to become victorious and successful. And it's like I said, meditating on Torah. It's taking on the sign of the covenant through circumcision. It's the celebration of Passover. Mm-hmm. It's this 2-chapter long, almost over the top meditation on the ark as it processes across the Jordan and the people behold it in a worshipful posture. Mm-hmm. It's one thing after another. The book is guiding us into the things that will give the people standing and success and victory, and none of them are military.
Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please make sure you subscribe using the link below and check out some more of our videos.